Ethereum is exploding, but the altcoins are asleep. Yes, you read the title correctly, and that's exactly what today's video is about. We're going to take a look. What on earth is happening with Ethereum? 4,200 US dollars. These are truly historic moments happening right now. Today we're going to dive deep into the details. What's going on with Ethereum? What can we expect in the coming days and weeks? And of course, we'll also address the question, what on earth is going on with the altcoins? Many altcoins are still lagging behind. You can also see it in your own portfolio that certain positions are still asleep. And that's exactly the question we're going to tackle in today's video. Naturally, we'll also take a look at what's happening with Bitcoin, so definitely stick around until the end. That way you'll get a comprehensive overview of what's currently happening in the crypto market. Before we dive into the content, I'd obviously appreciate your support, a like, a nice comment, and of course, if you're new here, a subscription. Otherwise, if you're completely new, feel free to check out the video course. With this video, you'll definitely be well prepared for the coming weeks. Otherwise, let's jump right into the core question. Ethereum is exploding, but the altcoins are sleeping. And for that, I've prepared the most important chart today, and I'm pretty sure you've never seen this one anywhere else on YouTube. Specifically, I've put together a special chart here, and this chart is custom coded. So, let's take a look here in the Pine editor. I'll admit I did the whole thing with ChatGPT, but still, this is what it looks like. Accordingly, I've prepared a chart here. This chart is called Total Free divided by Ethereum Crypto Cap. That's the name of the whole chart. I'll go into detail in a moment about what this is all about. Please don't get confused by this text up here or by this chart, because it's currently not included. What you can see here in blue, in other words, this blue chart, represents the entire altcoin market divided by Ethereum. And I'll explain what that means now. So when this chart rises, it means that altcoins are performing better than Ethereum during that period. Then we saw the pivot here, specifically this high point on April 28th, 2025. And from that point on, Ethereum performed significantly better compared to the altcoins, which is why we see the drop here. And that's also why things feel a bit strange for many altcoin investors at the moment. I've noticed it myself in my own portfolio, where you start to wonder, okay, wow, Ethereum is really performing incredibly well here. We can take a look at this right here. We see a plus 42% on a monthly basis. But if you look at all the altcoins, also on a monthly basis, you really have to realize, you really have to admit, okay, at the moment, we're actually being outperformed by Ethereum in some cases. Of course, there are naturally some individual exceptions. I also have certain low-cap projects in my portfolio. They've done a 2x, a 3x, but still, to be honest, I also have an Ondo in my portfolio. I also have other projects in my portfolio that haven't outperformed Ethereum yet, and that's something we need to keep in mind here, as I said. Of course, I'll talk about when a turnaround might happen in a moment, when we can expect altcoins to start outperforming Ethereum. But still, it's a very clear observation. Even Solana is only up 11%. Other projects here, Ton up 12%, ADA up 9%, Injective, which I personally also, so I'm not invested in it right now, but personally I'm convinced by a project like that. But even there, we have to keep in mind that they're still dormant at the moment. And now let's take a look at the chart here, and this chart definitely gives us insight into what's currently happening. It's clear, Ethereum is dominating, altcoins are lagging behind. But one thing I can say right away, there's no need for us to worry here. It's completely natural that in such a process, liquidity is first concentrated in Ethereum, and only afterwards does it gradually trickle down into all the various altcoin projects. Of course, you could also ask here, why didn't I just hold only Ethereum and buy all the altcoins later on? But unfortunately, it's not that simple in practice. That's why we need to be patient for a bit longer. We're about to dive very deeply into the details of what we can expect now, both for Ethereum and, logically, afterwards for the altcoins. And we can also ask ourselves here, when will the turning point happen? So, when will this process occur where liquidity trickles down from Ethereum into the smaller altcoin projects? So, first of all, let's logically take a look at Ethereum, because at the end of the day, everything depends on Ethereum. Only when Ethereum has its run, when this process actually unfolds, can we expect an upswing in the altcoins as well. That's why we're going to dive in here now. What we can see at the moment is truly historic. I don't want to spread any FOMO or anything like that, but speaking purely factually and looking at it objectively, it's incredible what's happening with Ethereum right now. We've broken out of a pattern here that has been forming since the last cycle in 2019-2020, as we can see here. Here we can see that in October 2020, we have the origin of this pattern, a kind of symmetrical triangle. Even though I don't want to focus too much on these patterns right now, it's still a fact. Extremely important resistance levels above us have been broken. We can also actually see in the MACD indicator, which is one of the most relevant momentum indicators, that we're getting a bullish cross here in combination with this breakout, in combination with Ethereum's current strength, as we can observe here. We're seeing hardly any sell-offs. At this point, we have a clean upward movement without any significant pullbacks, and that definitely speaks to the relative strength. That clearly speaks in favor of Ethereum, and at the moment things are looking incredibly good. As I said, we've just had a golden cross. In addition, we can see that the recent resistance levels have been overcome. Now we can go into a bit more detail here. At this point, I can also hide the indicators. And let's take a look at all of this for Ethereum on a weekly basis, where we can clearly see that these resistance levels have now been overcome. We still have to be patient at this point, but right now it looks very, very, very good that this weekly candle will close above and that the next weekly candle might do a small retest or shoot straight up and touch the previous all-time high from 2021, which we can see here at $4,800. That will definitely be an extremely, extremely tough resistance above us. So at this point, I want to issue a little warning. I can easily imagine that some kind of rejection could happen here, that something like this might occur. Something like that is very possible and very realistic. So we definitely need to prepare ourselves for that again, especially if the previous all-time high gets tested here. By the way, we saw the same thing happen with Bitcoin. We can take a look at that here. Back then, when we tested the previous high here, there was also a brief consolidation phase, and something like that could be very, very typical for Ethereum as well. That there might be another consolidation right before the previous all-time high, that something like this could happen again. So definitely keep that in mind. But personally, I don't think there's going to be another big crash or anything like that. Definitely check out the other YouTube videos. So feel free to watch this video here on my channel. In that one, we specifically talked about my plan, and so far everything has played out exactly as predicted. As I said, watch the other videos. We can also take a look at the latest Bitcoin forecast here. I marked $114,000 in yellow here, which could be a potential scenario. And if we compare the forecast from 6 days ago with the current Bitcoin price, we can see that it has played out exactly as predicted, 1-to-1. That's why you can definitely see that these analyses are solid, that I'm not just making things up, but that everything is ultimately based on market logic. And that's why I personally believe that we'll soon see Ethereum reach 4,800, but then there will be another rejection and a consolidation phase before the real breakout happens, only once the previous all-time high is surpassed. This brings us to the main point. In my opinion, the real move will only happen once Ethereum has broken through to a new all-time high, essentially 4,800. If you want to be even stricter about price discovery at this point, I personally want to see a weekly closing price for Ethereum above $4,800. That's something that's very important to me personally. So you can go ahead and note down that number. The $5,000 mark will be the make or break point for Ethereum. Because if a price discovery phase happens here with Ethereum, then things will move very quickly. And I can easily imagine that Ethereum's dominance will start to decline, that people will gradually begin to take profits, and that the rotation, that is the liquidity process towards altcoins, can then take place. And that's why I've drawn the yellow box here as well. If you want, you can go ahead and copy this, take a screenshot or something similar. That way you'll have the chart at home yourself, so to speak. But this is my current reference point, that we dip into it once more, and then later, dominance will definitely be given up again, meaning that in such a process, altcoins will perform better than Ethereum. That's my current standpoint. So make sure you're prepared. At the moment, you can still get ready. In my opinion, it's still legitimate to build positions right now. I also think it's still legitimate to buy more at this point. That might be a bit controversial, in quotation marks, compared to other YouTubers who say, yeah, only buy when there's fear, or something like that. But in my opinion, yes, purely structurally speaking, from a chart perspective, there are still a lot of setups right now that look very, very good, where we currently have bottoming phases. If you want a separate video on which altcoins I'm keeping a particularly close eye on at the moment, feel free to subscribe here. Then I'll make a separate video on that in the coming days, or we can also discuss the whole thing in a live stream if you prefer. I'll also announce when I'll be live next time, just so you're already in the loop. That's all for now on the current topic of Ethereum. So that you're already informed, I've also prepared a tweet to summarize everything again. Just weeks ago, everyone was afraid of not holding enough Bitcoin. We all saw it, the Bitcoin dominance kept rising endlessly. Everyone had a bit of FOMO when it came to Bitcoin. Now, we're seeing exactly the same thing happening with Ethereum. Even though Ethereum hasn't even surpassed its all-time high yet, we're already seeing massive FOMO. People are asking, is it still worth buying Ethereum? Or what's your price prediction for Ethereum for 2025? Or something like that. So you can definitely notice, slowly but surely, that these questions are coming up again, and that retail investors are starting to come back a bit. That's definitely my personal observation as well. And then I wrote here again, the next logical step is definitely the FOMO into altcoins. Whether or not an altcoin season actually happens at the end of the day depends on Bitcoin. We can talk about that in a moment. Yes, what I also expect, let's say, for the coming weeks. But in any case, the next logical step is that at some point this liquidity will trickle through and that dominance will once again be given up in favor of altcoins. So, as I said, it could very well be that Ethereum first needs to finish its run, that Ethereum needs to reach $5,000 or $6,000 before this strong upswing and major liquidity boost really flows into the altcoins. So that's definitely my personal opinion at this point in time. So now you're definitely in the loop as well. Otherwise, purely from an on-chain perspective, I don't want to make today's video too theoretical. So if you want more detailed information, feel free to check out my Twitter as well. But I've summarized everything there once again about what's currently happening on-chain with Ethereum, and in my opinion, things are looking very good at the moment. We're building on a very, very solid foundation. So we're still far from being overheated or anything like that. So feel free to read through it or take a look at it at your leisure. I don't want to dive too deep into that right now, but I still just want to give you the information you need here. We're still in the green zone. So far, we don't need to worry about overheating or anything like that. we have a very solid foundation. We can also see here that fresh capital is flowing into Ethereum. We can see this here based on on-chain data. So we definitely have enough data at the moment to not have to worry about overheating or anything else. We're often building a much better foundation than we did back then. The last attempts we made were much more overheated. And by the way, this can also be explained by the current fear and greed index. We can take a quick look at CoinMarketCap here, and you really have to keep this in mind. Right now, we have a fear and greed index of exactly 59, and that's really impressive when you think about it. At this point, we can take a look, and it's definitely very impressive when you consider that Bitcoin is on the verge of reaching a new all-time high. Guys, if this too on the Fibonacci level is broken to the upside, in my opinion, prices could move up relatively quickly. 130, 140,000 US dollars. We discussed this in the last videos in the recent analyses. Now, in any case, in the coming weeks, the next major upswing in global liquidity is coming. I went into great detail about this in the last videos. As I said, tune in here. This was 2 days ago. I had already announced it back then, a week ago at that point. Back then, Bitcoin was still at 114,800 US dollars. We perfectly caught the bottom because we could clearly see that global liquidity was continuing to rise. That's why, as I said, I personally believe that as soon as this high is reached at the 2 on the Fibonacci level, things will really take off again, including for Bitcoin. And that's why, personally, I am still keeping my long position open at the moment. You can see it right here, $2,000 in profit. Yes, my current profit is 1.4k USD, stop loss set just below. And that's why I'm also keeping the long position running. By the way, at that point, everyone in my Telegram group also had the opportunity to open a long position here. You can see it here. Liquidity was taken at 13,300 USD. I'm long, and I demonstrated the whole thing here again using the liquidity. That's why everyone who was in the group could definitely benefit greatly from it. In my opinion, it was definitely predictable because global liquidity is a very precise indicator of what happens with Bitcoin. As I said, I showed it here again, and that's why it was relatively plausible to me that Bitcoin would reach new highs. If you're wondering how to join the Telegram group, as I mentioned, I've explained it in the video description. Otherwise, you've now received all the information here in full. The traditional markets are also reaching a new all-time high, so things are also looking very good there, and we can expect new highs in the coming days. And as we all know, the traditional market, like the S&P 500 or the Nasdaq 100, in turn has an influence on the crypto market, on Bitcoin. So just so you're aware of that as well, and there's also liquidity above us. That's why I personally still believe that the liquidity will be tapped sooner or later. Of course, there's no guarantee that things will continue exactly like this. It's also possible that we drop again to 116,000 US dollars. At the end of the day, that's just crystal ball talk. So at the end of the day, no one really knows what will happen with Bitcoin in this case. Personally, however, I assume that this week, as I said, the video will probably go online on Monday morning. That this week we will tap into the liquidity at least one more time. If that's the case, I might also take some initial profits here at this point. I'll definitely keep you updated about that in the Telegram group. Otherwise, we've now discussed everything from A to Z here. You now know what my plan is regarding Ethereum. We still have to be patient. There are definitely important key levels still above us. Nevertheless, structurally, things are looking very clean. We've received historical signals. As for altcoins, we just have to be a bit more patient. So please don't let yourselves get shaken out of the market thinking you need to sell off your altcoins or anything like that. In my opinion, the majority is still ahead of us. Especially once Ethereum starts its run. If we see new all-time highs there, then sooner or later, it's a logical process, a logical sequence. Sooner or later, the altcoins will also start to pick up. That's why I personally am positioned. I still have my altcoin portfolio, and as I said, if you're interested in that, feel free to subscribe. I'd be happy to record another video for you in the coming days. Otherwise, that's actually it for today's YouTube video. If you still have some time and want to watch more content, feel free to check out the last video, or up here on the top left, I've linked my video course. There you'll definitely get the perfect foundation for this cycle, so you won't make any structural mistakes. It's definitely worth taking a look. As I said, everything is linked in the video description, both how you can join the Telegram group and how you can grab the $400 bonus. So I've definitely set up a cool promotion there together with Bitunix. And if you're wondering where I personally buy my spot positions, or if you're looking for a well-regulated exchange, I can only recommend Bitpanda. That's where I often buy my cryptocurrencies. So that's where I buy and sell. But I execute all my trades and leverage positions on Bitunix. So as you can see, my current trade is open there right now. And as I said, you can get $400 completely free if you deposit 2,000 US dollars here. It's definitely a very nice deal that you should take advantage of. Otherwise, thank you very much for your attention, and I'll see you again in the next video.